the session today. With me is Anina Seiler, who many of you have already communicated with. She's in the background running our webinar.
Hi folks, I'm Anina Seiler, Grants Manager for the Municipal Planning Grant Program, and I'll be fielding some of the questions and sharing them with the panelists today.
All right. And with us today, we have, from the impressive pool of experts at the Vermont Regional Planning Commissions, we have two planners bringing their knowledge and experience from opposite ends of the state, Regina Mahoney and Jason Rasmussen. Regina?
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. I am with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, have been there for 5 to 6 years now, and come with some municipal experience at the town of Milton before that.
Hi, this is Jason Rasmussen. I'm with Southern Windsor County Regional Planning Commission, and I've been doing planning in Vermont and New Hampshire for the last 18 years, and hopefully we can answer your questions later on.
Great. We'll hear from them later after a short presentation, but first I want to welcome you. We're thrilled that so many of you are interested in exploring ways to improve your town plan. Every year we see municipal planning commissions and staff striving to make their plans better. It's inspiring and we want to help. So last year we reviewed a lot of plans as well as the latest research, got input from towns, and came out with a new planning manual to serve as a guide for preparing your plans. We just issued an update to incorporate the latest legislative changes. It can be found online, and we'll send you a link after the webinar. As of last year, the vast majority of Vermont municipalities had a regionally approved plan. This is incredibly impressive, especially since half the towns have less than 2,000 people. For those of you starting a plan this year, the planning manual and this webinar are intended especially for you. We're glad you're taking this opportunity to step back, consider the big picture, and think about how to approach your planning process. We've done a lot with planning in Vermont, so why do we need to do more? Well, here's one common town plan pitfall that we've all fallen into. Town plans can easily become a repository for all the information you can find about the town. If an encyclopedia of the town is what you want, this can be fine. But where's the vision? What about the future? Where's the plan? You've given us feedback and said you want shorter and clearer plans, but we know it's tough to create succinct plans when you have 14 statewide goals and 12 required elements that you have to address. But this is the challenge we have before us. From our research, we learned there are 3 components to an effective town plan. You need a shared vision. You need goals and objectives that reflect the community's capabilities and then include measurable targets, and naming specific actions that will implement those goals and objectives. So let's take a quick look at the planning process as presented in the planning manual, starting with the 5 steps. The town plan process is part of a larger planning cycle. We'll briefly introduce each of these steps, but here you can learn more about them in the manual. We start with an assessment of the town. Are there existing conditions and future trends that will shape the future of your community and affect the decisions you need to make? If so, this is where you document them. For most towns, you'll need to take a good look at the projected changes in demographics and other information to help make educated guesses about the future. This is just one type of data you'll need to collect and analyze in step 1. State planning law requires that approved municipal plans address a wide range of issues, but it's really about being comprehensive in your approach to planning, but picking out the information that's most relevant to your town. Your regional plan addresses these same issues, so one approach is to start with the data and assessments in the regional plan and further refine it for the town as needed. The planning manual also lists some key considerations that you can use to focus your assessments. Every town is different, so the considerations and emphasis you give to the topic will differ as well. Since it's easy to get bogged down in the assessment stage, Here's a simple piece of advice to guide you. But how do we create a plan for tomorrow? We start by forming a community vision. We humans have the remarkable ability to imagine where and what we want to be in the future, and then meld our ideas with other people to form a common vision. Think about how amazing that is. But it's not easy. We need tools and systems to help us. The planning manual offers one simple approach. Consider the places you want to maintain, evolve, or transform in the future. Your town might envision a historic neighborhood or your agricultural land as places to be maintained to ensure the continuation of these places that people love. There are also situations where people want to change or improve things, but that change needs to be gradual. For example, a step-by-step evolution of Main Street may be necessary to make it more pedestrian and bike-friendly. And then there are situations where your town is ready to go for big changes that transform some part of your community, like taking a derelict property in a village and transforming it into affordable homes. But identifying this kind of transformation in your town plan, you can attract funding and assistance that will bring your vision to reality. But to arrive at an understanding of the degree of change desired by people in your town, you'll need to get out of your committee room and talk to them. There are lots of ways to reach out to people that we present and link to in the planning manual. This example clues you into a few key components: food, art, and celebration. At the most basic level, planning commissions working on town plans need to signal that they're open to input and give people reasons to gather and discuss common issues. It doesn't hurt to use media effectively to get the word out either, but direct person-to-person outreach is important too, especially in small towns and for issues that may be controversial. Your community conversation might result in a vision statement like this that articulates what the town wants to be. Richmond used interviews, townwide and neighborhood meetings, and online surveys to arrive at these statements. The vision can also be expressed in the form of a maintain, evolve, transform map that talks about the town's aspiration in terms of places. A conceptual map like this provides a great foundation for the rest of the plan. So how do you bring that vision into reality? You start by identifying the steps your town can take to achieve the vision. We've all come up with goals and objectives that look like this. But do these statements actually accomplish anything? Do they tell us what to do or help us know if we've arrived at our goal? Watch out for words like encourage and facilitate. If you can, use more action-oriented verbs. Instead of vague statements, we're recommending more specific language in your plan. Yes, I know it's longer and wordier, but how about aiming for fewer but more meaningful goals and objectives? Start with a goal that names a specific approach to making the desired improvements. Then determine how you're going to know if you succeeded in reaching that goal. In this case, we're showing a measurable target, like a 10% increase in people who walk and bike. For some goals, there might be important policies governing how you're going to allocate limited funding to achieve the goal. So that should be included in the plan as well. And finally, we'll want to identify specific actions that will get us to the goal. Identify who, what, when, how the work is getting done. If you can't identify or agree on any actions at this level of detail, ask yourselves if the goal really belongs in the plan. Once we've determined our goals and objectives, then we map out what we want to see on the ground in the future. Think about the gradations of land use categories in your community and where you want to maintain, evolve, and transform. A future land use map is required by statute and is one of the primary ways towns show how their vision will play out in the real world. Your Regional Planning Commission will be able to assist you with preparing this and other maps for your town plan. If your town has zoning regulations, the land use map will form the basis of the zoning map. There's much to say about mapping, but I'll have to direct you to the manual and move on to the final town plan step, the implementation stage where we identify priority actions. A town plan is all about presenting a vision for the future that can guide decision making. Zoning and other regulatory documents are some of the tools you can use to realize your vision, and then there are non-regulatory tools as well. Many towns are now using an implementation table to communicate and track their implementation actions and priorities. We offer this example in the updated planning manual, but this is just one approach. At a minimum, try to include the action, timeline, who's responsible for doing the work, along with any anticipated cost. If you've received a wealth of good ideas for how to proceed, how do you organize and determine which actions deserve the most urgent attention? It all boils down to what is most likely to work in your town and what your town can actually accomplish. Those need to be your priorities. Many of you asked us to explain how to write a plan that will set you up for effective land use regulation. While a plan isn't designed to be regulatory in itself, it's important to use the plan as the rationale for any local land use regulation. Plans do come into play in the state's Act 250 land use permitting and in the Section 248 process for energy facilities. These are some of the points that we should keep in mind if we want our plans to influence state permitting. So we've gotten through the 5 steps, and now let's say you have a newly adopted town plan. Thanks to legislation passed last year, it'll be another 8 years before the plan expires instead of 5. And if you want to maintain a good, regional confirmation of your planning process to access various state benefits, in a couple of years you'll need to demonstrate that you're actively engaging in a process to implement your plan. Your Regional Planning Commission is prepared to help you meet this requirement. With an adopted plan in effect, now it's time to get the real work done. In the end, your town plan is about making your community better. From updating regulations to studying a particular issue in greater depth to bricks and mortar improvements, the plan will help channel the town's investments of time, money, and energy towards the common goals. And periodically, it makes sense to review your implementation actions to see whether you're making progress towards your goals and to make adjustments if needed. This is what we mean by town plans that matter. So that's the end of the presentation, and now we're going to direct some questions to our guests, Regina Mahoney and Jason Rasmussen. We'll start with questions that you've asked us to address in advance of the webinar. If there's time at the end, we'll take some live questions from you, and maybe we'll take some of those questions while we're answering the prepared answers. And you can type those questions into the comment box at the top right corner of the screen. So, as we talked about in the presentation, the statute requires a lot of elements to be addressed in the plan, and they always seem to be adding new ones, making it harder and harder to do short and concise town plans. So, do you, Regina and Jason, have any further thoughts about how to create shorter and clearer plans for addressing all these required elements, as well as whatever might be important to the town itself?
Well, I guess, one option is perhaps not resulting in a shorter plan, but state statute allows towns to adopt the regional plan by reference. So you certainly could do that in whole or in part. We've had one town that decided to adopt our regional economic development chapter as their town's economic element. So that's certainly an option. Or another option might be to just look at the regional plan and pull out the nuggets, the pieces of it that really pertain to your town, and insert those. And perhaps by doing so, it's a little shorter or at least easier for you to just borrow from what we've already done in the regional plan. And I think also a lot of the data and information analysis that are in the regional plans, in many of the regional plans anyway, have been developed in a way that towns can borrow them. And so it's sort of intended to be a great starting point for you.
One other option is potentially to think about the data that is necessary in the plan. There's a whole sort of spectrum of how you can address this, from just keeping very simple fact sheets as an appendix to the plan. Thanks to Lee Crone, Manchester's plan is an example of this. Essentially, you can just sort of download the census fact sheet and literally just attach it to the back of the plan. The planning manual suggests the community profile, which also is intended to sort of be separate from the plan. And so you can update it more frequently if you would like to, but you also can sort of do some analysis within that community profile and then just simply pull up the pieces that are most relevant more forward into the text of the plan. And one thing that we were kind of thinking about to try to prevent months and months of analysis paralysis is potentially to not think about the town plan process as one linear process from the beginning to the end, and instead do some of the data analysis, but think about your vision and think about where you want to go, and then go back and see if there's any of the data that really needs to be analyzed further in order to help you figure out how to address the issue that's on the table, as opposed to really analyzing every bit of data to death that may not necessarily send you into any different direction than you would have gone otherwise.
Those are both great ideas. I think this idea of using the regional plans as for the assessment sections is a really important one, but one that we don't really have a strong track record for yet. But it's something that those of you working on your plan starting now could explore with your regional planning commissions. Yep. And also, I was thinking when Regina was talking that maybe the next time we update the planning manual, we need to graphically show that circle of the planning steps with little circles inside them, so that you're not thinking that you just have to end one step before you go on to the next.
Yeah.
And then I also want to just say that we're hoping that we can help you with the assessment piece further by, at the state level, by compiling all the data that's pertinent to your town in our new planning atlas. And over the next year, we hope to roll it out so that eventually all the assessment information that you need will be, you'll be able to download in one dump and as a profile for your town. And then you don't have to work on information collection as much. You can move right on to thinking about what that means for your aspirations.
That's great.
Another thought is that, there's a bunch of other plans in both the town or in the region.
Yeah.
And, you might, instead of starting from scratch, just look at those documents. For example, maybe there's a stream geomorphic assessment for your river. Maybe there's a housing needs analysis for the region. And you can pull out the key points and really how that relates to your town. And instead of getting into a bunch of narrative, you can just really pull out those highlights for you. Or you could have something like an open space plan that might do all of the inventorying and needs assessment for your public lands or recreational trails or wherever it might be in your community. And in the town plan, you could basically adopt it by reference, or again, just pull out the key points.
That's a great suggestion.
Yeah. And also, we've all seen the plans that have 200, 300 maybe things to do going forward. So one thing is to really try to think strategically about what you're actually able to do, think about the time frames for it, and try to sort of narrow those down. And like Faith said in the presentation, if there are some that are just so kind of pie in the sky that aren't reality and they can't be done, maybe it means that those can just come out of the plan.
Good. Well, those are all great suggestions. So let's move on to the second question. This is about we're going to address a number of sort of sub-questions under this larger category about the effect of the plan on regulatory processes. And I just want to say, recognize that a lot of you have asked questions about how to structure your town plan to be able to influence the siting of solar, wind, and other renewable energy facilities. And while we appreciate your concern about it, it's a topic that really requires a whole training in itself. Luckily, the regional planning commissions are all working on energy planning right now. So please contact your regional planning commission to receive assistance on that topic. And we'll also provide a link to the state guidance on that subject. But those questions about energy point to a broader question about how you ensure your vision for the town will carry out through all the regulatory processes, whether it's your local regulations, Act 250, or Section 248.
So this is a great question. Personally, I'd rather our plans not be used in a regulatory process, just because it's ideally they're more visionary. But the reality that we live in is that these plans are used in a regulatory process at Act 250 and Section 248. And so if you want to participate in those proceedings, you do have to have plan language that is actionable and directive and unambiguous. And Jason has some good thoughts about maybe that doesn't need to be every goal and strategy in your plan.
Yeah, I think, certainly think strategically. What are those 3 or 5 things that you care most about, and really try to hone in on having very clear mandatory language on those things alone, and maybe the rest of the language can remain with the encouraged type statements that, and maybe that's just fine.
Yeah. And this is really pretty hard to do. We're trying to do it right now in Bolton. Thankfully, we've got Sharon Murray, who has lots of experience here in Vermont with this stuff, helping us out. But it's really challenging, and sometimes the difficulty is trying to get to consensus on some of the really, really specific language. And it may be that there are things that you already protect in your zoning regulations, so it's very clear and easy to be directive about that because the town has already made a decision to protect those things. There may be other resources that there may still need to be some debate about after the town plan is finished and when you get into your zoning amendment process. So for those, maybe you can't use such directive language if your town isn't quite ready yet to make that step.
Yeah.
And I guess, as an example, you might say, protect the ridge lines. Well, that's great, but you really need to clarify where the ridge lines are and what you really need to do to protect them, and just to give the average person the sense of, where in town is that can be an issue, and what do you have to do to address it.
Yeah, well, really, in the regulatory realm, if you want your language to have effect in the regulatory realm, you kind of need to think like a landowner or a developer, right? And how clear is that? Is that going to give them a sufficient heads up about what your intention is for that location? And if it's not clear enough to give them a heads up, then it probably won't hold water in Act 250 or Section 248.
So I guess in summary, the town plan is probably the key thing to think about is the basis for any land use regulations that you have. So for example, we had a town who had flood hazard regulations, but the plan was totally silent on flooding. And that's not really okay. So the plan needs to say flooding is an issue and provide that basis for those regulations. Now the Act 250 and the Section 248 related language is optional. And so, just if you want to have impact in those 2 proceedings, make sure you just use the appropriate language in the appropriate sections and use that mandatory, clear language.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one example of that is that the word shall and must not always necessarily make the point. One specific sentence that was sort of held up as a good and clear example is simply that no development should occur within a flood hazard area. Pretty clear, nothing ambiguous about it. So if you're at the point where you've got a resource that you can protect in that way, then go ahead and be clear about it.
Yeah, and in that case, the word should didn't weaken the statement,
yeah.
Or at least that's what the court said.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not easy to give advice on this particular matter because it's kind of up to the courts how they're going to interpret things. But let's go back to talking about how the plan relates to zoning and other municipal regulations. We had a question about how should the land use map relate to the zoning map, and can they be the same or?
So we get this question quite a bit about whether the zoning map, or rather, can the future land use planning area map in the town plan be the zoning map? I think general rule of thumb is you don't want to do that, but I think in reality, if you only have a few different distinct land areas in town and you don't really have any guiding direction in your plan to change any area of town from one land use to another, it's probably fine for your zoning map to essentially mimic the land use planning area map going forward.
Yeah, I think the future land use map is an opportunity to do the planning. You take that step back, what's working for the town, what's not working for the town, lay out generally in more general sense where you want to go for the future, and then the zoning is really where you get a little more detailed. And I think there should be different maps, and that's generally the way to look at them. But it's always an evolving process, and so there is a little bit of that. Maybe your last zoning updates inform your future land use map. And I think that's okay, but it's just part of that planning and implementation process.
Yeah, and there may be an area of town where you're thinking about changing that you don't know the exact boundaries of the area in which you want to change. So it's okay to use sort of fuzzy lines or at least language in the plan that helps describe a potential area for change, but not, fully 100% sure where it's going to go or what the boundaries of it will be.
Right. So you could use a blob,
yeah,
rather than graphically, rather than a actual boundary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we had another question that was more sort of tending towards, we might call the political side of things, asking about whether the select board has to act on definitive statements in the plan, and when they, choose to adopt or not adopt a plan. So, you have any thoughts in that regard? I mean, I think there's both legal and political questions here.
Yeah. So, this is interesting. There's certainly there may be a change that is called for in the town plan. And I would say, at least in my experience, the majority of the time that change is not entirely directive on exactly the way that change is going to go, but it may be more like explore further regulation for Class 3 wetlands or something, for lack of a better example, as opposed to the town shall protect Class 3 wetlands. If the town plan, And so it's pretty normal to have explore the protection of Class 3 wetlands written into the plan. And then the town may very well investigate doing that further level of protection in their zoning regulations. And they may find, for all kinds of sound reasons, that that further level of protection is not a good move. It's a little trickier if it's the opposite, that the town plan has sort of taken something very directive, because then you've got to figure out whether the town plan and the zoning regulations are inconsistent with each other.
And I think ultimately, the town plan preparation and adoption process is different than the zoning process in terms of, in my world, you get about a couple of people to a plan public meeting, and everybody comes out for the zoning amendments. So I think there's some recognition of sort of that. Zoning is more political. And so, maybe part of it is just being mindful of the language that you use. It's probably better to use language like explore these regulatory options instead of we're going to do it. But also recognize when you go to update the plan the next time around, if you said we're going to regulate that and it didn't happen, just acknowledge that and why, and move forward, change the goal or the recommendations as appropriate, and move on.
And there are instances where you are ready to do it in the plan, and or to be definitive, and so you can actually adopt your plan, strong language in the plan with the zoning change, and go through the adoption simultaneously. So those situations are usually amendments, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to be, but there could be something with a full plan update that's obvious at that point too.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a follow-up to the question about the zoning map and land use map. Is there another multimedia tool or graphic tool besides maps that could help convey the ideas to future planners that the town plan is trying to represent?
Cool.
Well, I think some of us are looking at, what we call the transect type zone. So Faith showed an image of sort of the from rural conservation looking land types to the downtown village center types. You can start to use some graphics that are representative of what your future land use categories are. And you can probably use photographs and other renderings, whatever graphics you might have on hand to really illustrate, we might be using this narrative, but here's what it looks like. Here's an illustration of what we want to achieve.
Mm-hmm. I suppose I hadn't really thought of this before, but you could even do a more illustrative land use map where you have your goal, with a line that points to the area on the map. I suppose that conceptual maintain, evolve, transform map that I showed from Bolton, that conceptual map, that kind of did that. That sort of presents where you want to go with this, but you could take that a step further too. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it sounds like we have one more question that we've thought about a little bit that you proposed in advance. This is a perennial question that we hear all the time, and it's something that we're always trying to find new and better ways to reach out to people. So what are some additional thoughts that you have about this?
So the picture on the slide is from some engagement for the Bolton town planning process. So this is really leading this effort is Emily New-Slayer at CCRPC office. And one thing that they did is actually have community engagement meetings in the 5 or 6 different neighborhoods that are in Bolton, to really sort of inspire folks to come out just to their neighbor's house and or wherever made the most sense in each of those geographic areas. And this case, it happened to be a barn, which is awesome. In another photo, you see 2 horses hanging out and participating in the meeting. But I think the concept and the idea here is really to go where the people are. And in this case, these meetings were called specifically for the town plan process, but It may be that there's a monthly lunch at the senior center or something like that where folks are already gathering and you can sort of go and ask them to engage with those folks.
And I think, part of it, it's always a challenge to get people to come out, but if, like, the Planning Commission members themselves just really make an effort to, talk to people, make phone calls, knock on doors, get them to the neighborhood meetings, whatever it is that is being planned, I think that helps a lot. And also, if there's sort of key questions that get people fired up, I think, use that instead of the same old boring come to the public meeting to update the town plan. Nobody cares about that. So try to think of a key issue that's going to get people to a meeting.
The other thing I would say is just to make sure you have a sort of a wide variety of ways that people can engage. One thing is just sort of leaving a poster board at the library or someplace where people sort of gather or move through often. And they could just sort of write their idea down and stick it on with a sticky note, to having an art contest, survey monkeys, online kind of things, in addition to sort of having the more traditional public meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like people these days in the digital age are actually somewhat hungry for opportunities to get together and celebrate their community. So it seems like the town plan can offer the occasion for that. Yeah. But maybe you need some of these things like art contests or other sort of celebratory things that you can add to that, but that can also enhance your discussion around the town plan.
Yeah, I think Richmond, I might get the food wrong, but I think it was a chili bake-off contest, not bake-off, obviously, chili cooking contest, I think, that, it was, the intent was to come together for the town plan, but at a meeting, but make it a little bit more interesting and exciting for folks to kind of come together for it.
Yeah, there's some really wonderful examples of what people have done around the state, and we tried to point to some of them in the planning manual, but there are also links there that will send you to a lot of other great resources that are available to give you ideas about how to approach community engagement. Any other questions?
Nope, it doesn't look like we have any others.
Okay, well.
But if anyone does have any questions that they want to pose to the panel now, you can type those in the question section of your GoToWebinar menu.
Okay, well, we still have a little bit of time, so are there any questions that we didn't address that people asked in advance?
Sure. We had a question that was posed in advance about the issue of forest fragmentation and new requirements.
Right. Yes. So the 2016 legislation, we had the issue around the expiration of the plan, so we have 8 years instead of 5 years now, and then we had the issue that to maintain your confirmed planning process, in addition to your approved town plan, you now also have to document that you're that you have an implementation program. So we addressed that a little bit in our presentation. But then the third chunk of legislation was the optional enhanced planning process for energy planning for plans to participate in the Section 248 process. And then finally, there was some language, some new definitions, and some new language around bulking up your land use plan to address forest and habitat issues. So in particular, there's mapping categories for large forest blocks and habitat areas and habitat connectors that towns are now being asked to address in town plans. And so we don't have any specific guidance available yet, but the Department of Fish and Wildlife has been doing training and guidance on this subject for a long time, and they'll be compiling that, and we'll be linking to it from our planning manual when they have it ready. The requirement doesn't go into effect until 2018, and so I'm expecting that the guidance will be ready for those of you adopting plans within that period of time. But just so you know, there's actually a series of trainings that the Department of Fish and Wildlife is doing on the updated BioFinder tool, and their training is going to occur in 3 locations around the state in March, and this will be a great opportunity to learn about how to map the forest blocks and the habitat areas for your town, and what resources are available in the BioFinder tool. And also, I just want to note that there is some pending legislation on the whole question of how to apply these forest and habitat areas, and so just keep an ear out for that. We'll be notifying you if there's any changes in statute after the legislative session is over.
So we have a few questions. One of them asks about a tool, a statewide tool or resource that's available for this sort of interactive phone conversation, or to put out surveys.
For community outreach?
To use, yeah.
Oh.
Good question. I think there's a
Front Porch Forum might be one statewide tool that's available.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, other tools that are not statewide, there's SurveyMonkey, which there is a free version of it. It doesn't give you a whole lot to work with, but it's at least, there are some, you can use it sort of minimally without paying, and I think there's probably some other open source survey kinds of things out there.
Yeah, I think Google Forms or something like that, and I don't know, I know that we've used our SurveyMonkey sort of additional level of analytics or whatever is part of it. You know, we've helped some of our towns with that. So again, I guess you could talk to your regional planning commission to see if that's a possibility.
Yeah, that's a good
Certainly.
idea.
We also have one suggestion about adding a 4th step to the maintain, evolve, transform process. The last step would be celebrate. So celebrating your accomplishments.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Good idea.
That sounds a lot more fun than review, annual review. Celebrate your accomplishments. We all definitely need that. So on that note, I think this is the end of our webinar, and great questions, everybody, and thank you for your participation before and during this session. We'll follow up by sending you links. We'll also be sending a survey seeking feedback on the webinar. And both the webinar and the survey will be available for those viewing it later. And in the end, thank you all for the work that you do for your town, and best wishes for your town plan process. Thank you.
Thank you.